Thank you, Sri Acharya. Thank you very much. I thank Pramod for upgrading me to this very eminent panel where I don't really belong. But it's a great pleasure to be with old friends and many colleagues. The subject before us is Asia's rise. And when we look at Asia's rise, to my mind comes two Asias, not one. One Asia is the Asia confined with Indo-Pacific. The other Asia is the Asia confined to West Asia and Central Asia. While one Asia is rising on the Indo-Pacific side, the other Asia is in great turbulence. And this turbulence has a huge spillover in other part of Asia, that is the Indo-Pacific Asia, flagged by, I will not go into details because we don't have time, in terms of their control over energy resources, particularly hydrocarbons, oils. Secondly, due to the religious radicalization which flows from West Asia and gets supported by West Asia. And thirdly, by regulating the what you call the migrant population from the Indo-Pacific Asia, which goes and works in West Asia. Therefore, West and Central Asia, though are not taken into reckoning while talking about Asia's rise, I would say that we must keep it at the back of our mind of the spillovers and implications of the kind of turbulence which is going on over there, because it will call for investment in policy, time, resources, everything in order to see if Asia is stabilized. Now, coming to Indo Pacific Asia, there is no doubt that China has risen phenomenally. And I think there is no parallel to the way China has risen. But China is not the only country which has risen. There are many other Asian countries which are rising. It is true that the recent pandemic has given a great setback to countries like India in their rise. But there are all calculations available with us which will show that these countries will come out of the pandemic and will resume their growth trajectory in a manner that they had been carrying it out earlier. There are countries like Vietnam, there are countries like Bangladesh. I mean, it's a very, very impressive record which Bangladesh has suggested to other. You can also consider Korea, Taiwan, and all said and done ASEAN, which is a group of countries, but they have tremendous promise and tremendous dynamism so far as rise is concerned. So this rise, I think, would continue, and with the economic growth, the countries are acquiring military capabilities, scientific and technological capabilities, and trying to manage their efforts in one way or the other. Now, with this rise all around in the Indo Pacific Asia, I think people have been mentioning, the countries, leaders, scholars have been mentioning about the Asian century. Now, whether it will be an Asian sanctuary or not, when we talk of Asian sanctuary, let us keep it in mind. If at all it becomes an Asian sanctuary, it would be the second time that it would be an Asian sanctuary, because often we forget the earlier period from 1st to 18th century when China, India, and Asia was dominating the world, both commercially, economically, and civilizationally. It is unfortunate that Asian scholars, largely because of imperialism, colonialism, have not been able to focus enough attention on the character of that Asian centuries and how the Asians governed themselves, how they grew themselves. I think it calls for a kind of an academic challenge or a policy challenge to analyze how Asian relations shaped themselves at that time. The perspective or the prospects of Asian century in the Indo-Pacific have been seriously challenged by the most, I say, most robust riser, which is China, and that is largely due to its assertion and aggression, which has raised serious questions about Asian century. That look, I mean, if Asia has to be recorded a new century influencing the whole world, there is a lot which China may have to be doing, and I'll come to it in a short while and conclude there. But we must remember, keep it in mind that any Asian century be a will have to uh, create a multipolar Asia. It cannot be a unipolar Asia where one country, unfortunately, all through the Cold War years, even during the colonial and imperial period, we had seen some kind of a unipolar Asia, one major powerful country dominating Asia. US dominated Asia for all the past maybe say 30, 40, 50 years. Now that is not possible if Asia is rising. As China says that it will not accept any other domination, China must also realize that any other rising Asian country will also not accept domination. And therefore, we will have to have what you call a multipolar Asia, where the Asian majors. Now, this multipolar Asia, we still have to work out the kind of a governance system of the Indo-Pacific Asian region, how it will then be governed. But to my mind, it will have to be consensual. And one consensual model is presented to us by ASEAN, where different sizes of countries really participate with conflict, not the governing idea, but cooperation and engagement being the governing idea. So ASEAN model may be one of them, but we can seek other models also. And I think amongst the other models can be a federal model where you have separate clusters of the countries and they collaborate and cooperate with each other. Well, this is just an idea, I'm flagging it, that in the federal governance, the major players and their clusters would actually decide the shape and contours of the strategic and economic aspects of Asia. The greatest responsibility, and this is my last point because I said I don't want to take much time, the greatest responsibility for pushing Asia or encouraging Asia or facilitating Asia towards an Asian century lies with China. And I think one of the major areas where China has to work is to resolve its conflicts and disputes with its immediate neighbors, particularly in South China Sea. Whole of ASEAN is disturbed about it. With regard to India, with regard to Japan, all these problems, if they continue to linger on, please forget about the dream of the Asian century, because that presents a fragmented Asia which is really operating. Now, for this, China claims that it has resolved its border disputes with so many countries. So then why leave it with some of these countries at all? And again, I don't have time to go into that. China makes promises, we will do this, and then does not carry out those promises. So one, it has to resolve its differences and its conflicts with the neighbors. It has to assure the rest of Asia that it will follow norms and it would not put in constraints in terms of movement and freedom, which is given by the global consensus. Then it will also keep the common spaces open. I mean, in South China Sea, for instance, how can China say that you will not have this area as a fly zone? You will not come into this area in one way or the other. And lastly, I think China will have to demonstrate that its economic engagement with the rest of Asia, which is very robust, very vigorous, will have to be based on mutual benefit. It cannot be based on unilateralism, whether it is a question of trade or whether it is a question of advantages which accrue out of it. It will not, it will have to share prosperity rather than exploit the resources all over in order to build its own prosperity single mindedly. I think these are some of the parameters. There is an articulation by President Xi and some of the Chinese leaders to say that this is all we intend to do. Unfortunately, this articulation has got to be seen on the ground in terms of reality. And if that is translated into reality, probably we would have made some steps forward towards creating a nation sanctuary. Thank you. I